Hi guys, in this video we are going to look at the composition of blood. In simpler terms, we are going to define what are the major components of blood. We're looking at the diagram seen on the screen, and from the diagram we're going to take down a short note, which is what are the major components of blood. And as seen on the screen, the four major components would be a substance called plasma. There's another substance called red blood cells. Sometimes it's referred to as RBC, right? Just as a shorthand, red blood cells. Blood also contains something called platelets. And last but not least, there's a component called white blood cells. Right, so we have four major components of blood. You're going to make sure and take down this note to tell me what are the four major components of blood. On the next slide, we'll be looking at the functions of blood. And in understanding the functions of blood, we will be able to understand why blood contains some of these components, as we are going to relate the functions of blood to these components. So I will start by looking at the functions of blood first. And as seen on the screen, it's a very short note which tells us what are some of the functions of blood, in that blood allows for the transport of substances which are needed, for example, nutrients, which includes food, minerals, water, and blood also transports oxygen to the cells of the body. Blood is also necessary to help the body defend against attack by germs, which may be bacteria or viruses, and in this way, this helps the body to defend against disease. A third function of blood is to transport heat. Right? So the transport of heat in blood allows the extremities of the body to warm up, right, as temperature or external temperature decreases. And one last major function of blood is that it will carry or transport waste substances such as carbon dioxide and urea away from cells of the body. Right, so just at your level, naming carbon dioxide and urea as two-way substances is acceptable. In my next slide, we are going to look at two of the components of blood and their functions, and you're going to be able to see that some of the functions performed by these components we generalize as the functions of blood. So for example, we have a substance which is called plasma. Plasma is actually that liquid part of blood, right? So it is the substance that holds all the other physical components of blood. So, and I'm going to go to this last line here and I'm going to bring it up. Plasma is really 90% water. So it's that watery part of blood, and I'm going to call it the liquid part, which contains the other substances found in blood, such as red blood cells, white blood cells, dissolved food substances, carbon dioxide, other waste substances, even hormones, heat, and platelets. They are all contained in plasma. Now, if you're asked what is the color of blood, people would usually say red, and this is because of red blood cells. But plasma is the major component of blood. It's that liquid part, and it actually tends to have a straw color or a very light yellow color. Right? It holds the other components found in blood, such as platelets. Let's talk about platelets. Now, from the name platelets, you can think of a platelet looking like broken parts of a plate, right? Uh, and based on this description, you can understand why where the name platelets came from, because we refer to the fragments of cells, right? So there are some fragments of cells which help in the clotting of blood, and these fragments of cells that aid in blood clotting, we refer to them as platelets. So as seen on the diagram on the right, if you are cut, these platelets rush to the site of the cut where blood would be escaping through the skin. And when they rush to the site of the cut, they're going to cause, as it says, blood clotting, right? So it's like I guess a gel, or it's just going to collect there and prevent any more blood from escaping through the surface of skin. So this is plasma and platelets. Let's move on to looking at the two types of blood cells. So just to reiterate, there are two types of blood cells. One is called red blood cells. The other is called white blood cells. Right, so let's say, for example, if you've ever had your blood drawn and examined, that sample of blood is run through a process called centrifugation, which separates the components of blood, let's say into plasma and those red blood cells. If we look at the plasma, you're going to see white blood cells, you're going to see platelets, even some red blood cells in there. Right, so in separating the components of blood, it's separated based on the density of the substances. So you can do a little research on that in terms of what or how a blood sample is separated through centrifugation, right? So it's not my area of expertise, so I will not go into detail, right? But we can separate the components through a process called centrifugation. Let's go back to looking at our two types of blood cells. And I'm going to start with our red blood cells, which are also called erythrocytes. And you should know this name, called erythrocytes. Now the entire note is written on the screen, but I want to go through it with you. Right, so we will look at red blood cells in terms of their function and their structure. Red blood cells are said to contain a red pigment, which is called hemoglobin. You should know the name of this red pigment. And hemoglobin is the substance which combines with oxygen, and that's how oxygen is transported in blood. This hemoglobin holds on to oxygen and takes it around the body. So this is what we would call the function of red blood cells. And these 3 points here refer to the structure of a red blood cell. So we say that it is biconcave or donut in shape. So if we look at it from the front, it looks like a circle. But if we look at it from the side, it has a donut shape, right? Or a biconcave shape. It is also mentioned that red blood cells have no nucleus, right? Because they have no nucleus, they can hold more hemoglobin. So it does serve a purpose. And we also say red blood cells have a large surface area. Now, all these characteristics which describe the structure help to make red blood cells a good substance to transport oxygen. So that biconcave shape allows for a large surface area, meaning the red blood cell can allow a lot of oxygen to enter it at very quickly, large surface area. Because there's no nucleus, it can hold more hemoglobin and hence transport more oxygen. What you're going to take down from me from the screen would be the function of the red blood cells. Right? You're going to take down that the name is also called erythrocyte. And you're going to take down the structure of the red blood cell in addition to these two very simple diagrams I've drawn on the right hand side. Right? So the front view and the side view. Let's move on to looking at white blood cells. Now, white blood cells help to protect the body, they help to defend the body, and we say that they help to protect the body from germs, helps to defend the body against diseases, and it can do so in two ways that we're going to look at very simply. And on my diagram on the right, this little animation here, those little white spots that you see which are moving around, those are the white blood cells. And of course, the other cells that you see would be those donut-shaped red blood cells. So from this slide, you're going to make sure and take down what is the function of white blood cells. On this slide, there's a little more information which is actually presented in a table, and it looks at two types of white blood cells. I'm going to use three new terms that I would expect you to know. And the three new terms are that white blood cells are referred to as leukocytes. Right, so this is their technical term. And there are two white blood cells that we will look at. One is called the lymphocyte. The other is called the phagocyte. Right, so we have lymphocyte and phagocyte. Our lymphocyte, as seen in this row here, can be distinguished from the phagocyte by their appearance. So the lymphocyte is said to have a large round nucleus, but the phagocyte is said to have a lobed nucleus. We can also distinguish them from where they're produced. Lymphocytes are made in lymph nodes. You can read up about lymph nodes on your own. Right, so you can do some research if you would like. And I'll mention that the phagocytes are not produced in lymph nodes, but they're made in bone marrow. I'm going to look at the function of our two types of white blood cells. And I'm very going to simply state that lymphocytes are used to make antibodies. Right? Lymphocytes make antibodies And of course, the function of these antibodies would be to defend your body against disease. We say that phagocytes destroy, and I'm going to take out this word here and replace it simply with germs. They destroy germs by ingesting the germ, right? This means, and in very simple layman's terms, right? The phagocyte goes up to a germ and they eat them, right? So they just eat them, break them down, and spit out whatever else is left, right? So lymphocytes make antibodies that help to defend the body against disease. And phagocytes, when they see germs, bacteria, viruses, microorganisms that do not belong in the body, they go up and they just absorb them, digest them. Very simply, they just eat them. And the name of this process is called phagocytosis. So on my screen, we're going to see a simple GIF which shows a phagocyte going up to some foreign material, ingesting it, and it's just going to break it down. Right? And that's what the GIF shows. I'm going to place it here. In this diagram, it shows me my lymphocyte. You can see a nice round nucleus. This is what we call a lymphocyte. And I've drawn a very simple diagram, which you should know how to draw. Right? Large round nucleus. And here we have a diagram which just shows a phagocyte, which it's with its lobed nucleus, it's passing through a capillary, and it's just passing or leaving the capillary through the gaps in the walls. Right, so this is how capillaries work. These gaps in these walls allow for white blood cells, such as phagocytes, to pass through the gaps to get to the cells in the body that need them, or to get to the bacteria or viruses that we need to get rid of. Please ensure to take down the notes seen on the screen, in addition to the diagrams which show the appearance of these two types of white blood cells. I'm going to end off my video by showing you a slide where in this slide, can you identify any of the components? Can you see a white blood cell? That is, can you see a lymphocyte with a round nucleus? Yes. Can you see a phagocyte with a lobed nucleus? So there's one here, here, here. Can you see any red blood cells? Yes. Right, so all these little red spots here would be red blood cells. And of course, our background would be our plasma. Okay, so I'm just gonna end off the video. Have